Are you looking for affordable office space in Marion? The professional building located at 685 Delaware Avenue is the place for you. For more information, call 740-383-6803. Office space is now available. Again, telephone number 740-383-6803. This is Scott Spears, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Scott Spears Now. Tonight's guest, a man I enjoy a lot. He's been on radio with me countless times, this time with me on television via Skype. He is the world-renowned mentalist, been on every show, Mike Douglas, Jimmy Fallon, you name it, Sally Jesse Raphael. He is the amazing Kreskin, and by the way, he has written a new book, Conversations with Kreskin. You won't want to miss this. Run right out and buy this. Conversations with Kreskin. Kreskin is always a unique interview because you learn something that you didn't know before, and particularly this time that was the case. We started talking about a Huffington Post article that he had written in regard to the draft and a war, and we ended by asking a question that he's never answered anywhere else. Will Hillary Clinton run for president? Coming from the man who's predicted the last two presidential elections, you won't want to miss the answer. Here is the amazing Kreskin. This is Scott Spears, and today we're joined by a good friend of this program, mentalist, the amazing Kreskin. Kreskin recently made some heavy comments on the Huffington Post that caught the eye of many viewers and watchers and internet goers, and today he's here to discuss those. And I also do want to mention Kreskin has a new book available. I got a copy of it just a few months ago. I love it. Conversations with Kreskin. Get that at all good bookstores, all good retailers around. Kreskin, it's always a pleasure to have you on via Skype this time.
We're actually, are we now looking at each other?
Well, I'm looking at you.
I can't see you, but you can see me, right?
I can see you.
Well, you know, I guess you're reflective of a change in our culture whereby, and I mean this as Chris is a positive thing tonight, because it's always nice to see each other when we're on the air and when others are listening, and we can our reactions can be captured visually. But I'm just thinking, Scott, are we signaling that the rest of the world is going to be on camera for the rest of the time? I have a feeling we are.
You would know better than I would.
Well, if it sounds like I'm losing my voice, I'm not really I've been using it all day, but this has been an extraordinary few days. And you mentioned the piece in the in Huffington Post, but I want to tell you, and of course it dealt with some predictions I made, and the kind of predictions, Scott, I got to tell you, that I never intended to make, at least not at this point in my life. I hadn't thought seriously about it. But for 8 months, it's been a topic in an area that's been on my mind. And before I even mention the predictions to you, let me reiterate something. And I've said this to all the press the past 3 days since this story started to break. I know a tremendous amount about very, very little, and very little about the rest. So don't consider me an authority on anything. It's just that, and I like to be quoted by that. That way I can absolve myself of a lot of responsibilities. But I do borrow. And I borrow from two sources. I borrow from my audiences, because of course my life is spent reading the thoughts of audiences and reading how people think, and intuitively projecting what their thoughts are. And the other thing is a lost art today, and probably many, many people have never heard of. It's a word that I think it's politically incorrect to even bring it up. It's called history. I know we're not allowed to teach it in schools today unless it deals with something that happened 6 months ago. But certainly our politicians. And you know, Scott, let me tell your listeners as well, before I go any further, I know it sounds like in recent weeks and so forth, people have seen me in public concerts that I've kind of scathed our political figures and been very critical of them. But let me backtrack and just say something in all due respect. We have certainly, at least nationally in Congress and in the United States Senate, some of the finest politicians that money can buy.
That's a heavy statement.
And I mean that quite sincerely. I believe that very, very deeply. If I were, and at one point my alma mater, Seton Hall, wanted me to give a semester on communications, which I couldn't have done unless it were once a week and fit into a schedule, but it was seriously considered. And I was going to discuss at that time, I mean, this is years ago, in the 1870s and late 60s, and it's in the 1970s and 60s. The rumor is out that I was born in the 1860s, but no, I've been around and at university, and when I got my degree studying psychology, and I would have wanted to even talk about then something which I would do with greater detail today on how really our political figures are not really following in the footsteps of our founding fathers. I've read thousands of pages on the writings of founding fathers, including Ben Franklin and so forth, and I think they would be turning over in their grave because a politician was not to be considered a profession in this country. The people who appeared in political positions were people who were successful and came out and then worked for the government for a few years to give back of their success. So, of course, Washington worked as a general and then as a president, and when he, at the end of him being the first president-elect of the United States, although there have been some others listed before him, they asked him to run again. He says, no, I'll go back to my farm. So everyone was supposed to give of their time and not get paid, let alone, have their children, their education paid for the rest of their life and having $100,000 salary. So today, I'm not saying that our politicians are corrupt, but I wish, and I would say this if I were appearing in front of Congress, I wish most of them had been on the Titanic.
Mm. Well, Kreskin, when do you think this change happened? When did it become a permanent job? Why do people cling to that?
It's hard to say as we study history because you go back to the days of Lincoln and so forth, and he was a man that never expected to run for president again and again. I think it happened when slowly it became clear that, and more so today, that the people that should be reelected, you got to understand when Alvin Barkley, when I was a kid, Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed away in his fourth term, and our political figures then in Congress, the United States, were very much in a concern because he had carried us through the war, Second World War, and here this man died in the middle of his fourth term. So, with great wisdom, and I say wisdom because I don't think our political figures have a particularly high IQ, but with great wisdom, they decided that a president should only be elected for office for 2 terms. And I was only a kid then, I wasn't even in my teens. But at that moment, and for the rest of my life, lost respect for them. I never thought of them as really the fine people I would have liked to have thought of, because I can't stand hypocrites. That's one thing about if you, and I am against organized crime, but at least with organized crime, they're consistent, where they stand. But these people were hypocrites, because if they felt that he should only hold office for 2 terms, then how is it some of them today have held office in the Senate and Congress for 40 years? It's a strange contradiction. But what has become the case is we have a serious dilemma, because the people that need to be elected, we should no longer elect any member of Congress. Frankly, I think we should throw them out. We should not elect any member of the Senate, because they really have next to nothing to do with political decisions. It's the lobbyists, and everybody knows this. There's about 100 lobbyists influence each of our senators and congressmen. And that's a substantial thing to say when you consider that right now in our United States government there are over 35,000 lobbyists. And I am told by people I'm very close to, including a couple of the husband of whom is an attorney, and that's an infection, because most of our people in political office and nationally are attorneys. And when you look at the founding fathers, they were farmers. I mean, Ben Franklin was a printer. These were people coming from all walks of life. In Italy, a couple of people and a member of the parliament are prostitutes. I'm not endorsing prostitution, although our certainly our political figures practice prostitution. But the reason that they're on because it is legal in the country of Italy, and they're supposed to reflect the country. That's not the case here. I suppose we could say that the reason that there's so many attorneys that are in office is maybe it's a percentage situation, because college students look at me and they say to me, Kreskin, no one ever told us this. I mean, I feel sorry for anybody going to law school today. I would almost say, are you out of your damn mind? Are you, who in the world coerced you? Because there is no work for you out there. Right now, in the first time in the history of mankind, unlike any city, unlike any state in any country of the world, in the United States today, as of 3 or 4 weeks ago, there's one attorney for every 256 people.
That's a heavy number.
Well, it's a number that doesn't even make sense. But we today, we perhaps deserve what is taking place because we have a sense of entitlement in our culture that everything is due us. That people are, I guess you can have insurance on school kids now until they're 22 years old or 28 years old. I don't know what it is now. Although some of the political figures looking for re-election are going to make it until the student is 68 years old. The sense of entitlement is really not what this country is all about. Freedom is not for free. It has to be earned. It really can't be given away. And I love this country. And I marvel at the founding fathers. I revere them. What tremendous wisdom they had. But I don't think they would have ever thought the day would come when we had political figures in such mass amounts that could be bought. I'm sure they were influenced to some degree in the past, but not that could be bought financially. And that's really a travesty. Other than that, listen, let me say something. Other than that, things are good.
Well, I do want to get into some of the things said on the Huffington Post, Kreskin, but I do want you to do one thing for me. In one sentence, describe what a mentalist is. So when we get into these things, people understand where it's coming from.
Well, I can't tell you what a mentalist is, generally speaking, because it could be the person on television in the series The Mentalist, which is a great series. I mean, I'll tell you the story behind the making of The Mentalist, which is in my book. And he's really a Sherlock Holmes character and played brilliantly by the Australian actors. You don't even hear his accent. I perform in Australia. I love to hear them talk, but as an actor, he sounds like an American person. But he looks at details and is observant and so forth. But my work as a mentalist is really basically that of being a thought reader. Now, I'm not a mind reader because minds are difficult to locate these days. But I believe under certain conditions it's possible to perceive a thought or an idea. And then by my performances, in which I have a great deal of fun. There's a lot of laughter, there's some serious drama, there's a lot of mystery, and I attempt to perceive the thoughts of people who are part of my audience. And now in a couple of days, I'm going to be heading for Chicago, where my audience will not be a theater, it will not be a coliseum, it will not be 800 to 3,000 or 20,000 people. It's going to be less than 100 people in a private affair of a company, and they will be experiencing the same as some of my performances are in private homes that executives has tried to change into a little theatrical setting. But still, in all my shows, I'm really revealing what people are thinking. I'm tuning in on their thoughts. And in other situations, I'm actually influenced their thinking and causing them to make decisions that I have in mind, even though there's been no verbal communication. And sometimes influencing them to the degree that they're responding uncontrollably. As I can remember a few years ago on New Year's Eve on Fox, they had me on Broadway, and I thought to myself, I've done it a few times. I've appeared on Broadway on New Year's Eve. I remember the first time I appeared there, I thought, whatever possessed me never to come here to Broadway on New Year's Eve, whatever possessed me all these years of my life must have been a gift or some wisdom for a guardian angel. Because, if you want to be in Broadway for the celebration, which is a great place to be, you have to realize, don't plan to use the bathroom for maybe 16 hours or 14 or 12 hours, because otherwise you're not going to be able to come into the, and now with security, I just talked to someone about an hour and a half ago for these celebrations now. They're going to people are going to have to be marked where they're staying. And if they leave, they cannot come back. And we understand this because this is different worlds. But that particular night on Fox, we gathered. It was very cold. I mean, the street was cold as well. We gathered about 20 or 18 or 20 people to join me. A lot of them were young people, college students. I remember one was from India. A lot of them were overseas. And I warned them. I said, when we get on the air, I'm going to spell my name. Make sure that you keep your balance and don't hurt yourself. And we went on the air. These were not stooges. They were not Confederates. This is not a magic act. This was absolutely, totally legitimate. And I proceeded to spell my name very slowly. But the second time I spelled my name, there was pandemonium. The camera crew and the police that were standing outside the circle said, "What the hell is going on?" And by the time I spelled my name the second time, I think all but two of the people had collapsed to the ground and were lying there prostrate. They couldn't get up. In fact, we had kind of an exciting time because the two hosts of the show went up to them and said, "Well, come on, you got to get up." He said, "I can't move." Some of the people couldn't speak. They'd become so paralyzed that they lost the use of their vocal cords. And this went on for, 8, 9, 10 minutes. Then we saw it was getting near New Year's Day. We had to go because it was now going to shift to the clock timing piece coming down and the band playing Auld Lang Syne, what have you. Well, Fox News had to pay a price for that. The show, our part went off the air, and I get called. I released them, and I get called by Fox in my hotel room in Brooklyn, New York. They said, "Kreskin, you got to be on the air tomorrow at 7 in the morning." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "It's now 2:30. I said, "Yeah, it's 2:30. I'm up anyway." They said, "We got over 100,000 calls. People want to know if these people were all right. Did you ever release them?" They never saw me release the people, so it was a dramatic cliffhanger. That's a little bit of how I define my work as a mentalist.
And how often are you accurate?
Oh, in perceiving people's thoughts, I like to say I'm 90% successful 10% of the time. I don't know. I've never really estimated that. I think a lot of it has to do with how well the audience is concentrating and what have you. But it's fairly high. But I just wouldn't make any claim. I might be held to that and have to pay some kind of dues if I was wrong.
Well, now, knowing what we know now, what a mentalist is, and knowing how often...
Now, wait a minute, before you say what you're going to say, that's not so true with predictions.
Okay.
My predictions have nothing to... I got to tell you, they don't have to do with reading people's thoughts. They have to do with knowing what they're thinking, how they're thinking. But when I make the predictions, I'm really using an intuitive thing. I'm reflecting on a gut feeling that builds up in me over a period of time. So when we talked the last time about my predicting the presidential election and how I came to write out my prediction 1 year and 4 months before election day this last November of 2012. I was on the Jimmy Fallon show in July 2011. I made my prediction by pouring myself into all that was going on in the media about political pictures, the controversies, and this is well over a year before the election, people that were bending for the possible running of it. And then I got off by myself and shut down everything. I shut down and refused to, for 1.5 days, look at anything dealing with politics, because I let my unconscious come to the conclusion, and that's how I predicted that the Democrats should win. What in the world made me write down? Because nobody knew who was going to be running for the Republican position. Nobody knew when I wrote it out on the Fallon show. And what maybe I tried to take a shot at it, and I wrote down Paul Ryan. Of course, I was wrong, and it was the most dramatic failure I've ever had in my life because, of course, he's the man that Romney picked sometime after the political party decided that Romney would run for president. And where I ever got Paul Ryan's name, it only happened when I was jogging the night before at 4:30 in the morning, and his name kept popping in. I thought, hell, I'm absolutely certain that Obama's going to win. I'm just going to write down Paul Ryan's name for the Republican ticket. It's one of the unexplained incidents in my life.
Kreskin, it brings up an interesting point because when you write down your predictions, you don't show anybody. They're put under lock and key and in safes and things like that. I understand not telling the public for the reason you just said, but why don't you show the host or one person there who possibly won't say anything?
Because, and can I mention this to anybody in show business or in the arts or in public life? First of all, in the case of the presidential election, a copy of that was in the hands of 4 people. Robin Leach in Los Angeles, who's now a columnist. It was in the hands of a gal, Jessie Fries, who went to the same high school I went to, and now has a political radio show in New Jersey. And a copy was at Patsy's restaurant, hanging over the bar in a safe. So 4 people were going to acknowledge it. But the reason I don't say it ahead of time is, if you want to keep a secret in life, make certain that every single writer you tell it to has either passed on or you've bumped off.
I understand. Now, Kreskin, I do want to get to the big thing on Huffington Post here, because you definitely rattled some people's cages. You talked about the military draft. What did you say, and why did you say it?
Well, first of all, it was a long range thing. We have right now a kind of war that we really aren't accustomed to having. We've really never had a war like this because we've had enemies. Certainly the First World War, the Second World War, and some of the wars that followed that. But we have been attacked from enemies from outside the country. And we have a fabulous military might. I have tremendous respect for our military and our military leaders. But we have a different war now, and it's the war that's been going on for a minimum, probably a lot longer, minimum of 13 years, because our Pearl Harbor was 9/11. There's no question that was our Pearl Harbor. If we forgot about it, then it's our price to pay. It's our guilt. We can't throw the blame. Excuses are made for losers, so let's not make excuses. But the bottom line is we've had a war for 13 years, and to say, well, there hasn't been any attacks, hell, how many attacks were attempted that were thwarted? Some of them are known publicly. Some of them are not known publicly. I have a member of my family who works for the CIA. My brother was in law enforcement for 18 years. I've worked in 84 crime cases in my life. Boy, we thwarted some very serious situations. At the same time, you cannot completely stop an enemy, especially when they're entrenched in this country. And they just didn't sneak in under the ground in one disguise as some woman or some panhandler. They're obviously here, and some would say hundreds, I would say thousands. So we have an ongoing war. And I think what's going to happen is that and I decided finally, I was urged by 4 people I know personally. I have great respect for their opinion. One person's in broadcasting, the other 3 have nothing to do with the public eye, but they say, Kreskin, express your opinion. And one man who wrote the introduction to my book that you have, Conversations with Kreskin, Roger Ailes, has said to me, he said, you say you're not an authority on anything. He looks at me and smirks and smiles. He says, you're giving the public an impression on various issues from a different direction. He says, that's why in all the years of the Mike Douglas show, we always asked you unexpectedly something you didn't know what the question was going to deal with. But I think the public is going to realize that they're going to have to support each other. That we're going to have to, in some sense, be on the alert for each other. Neighborhoods are going to have to return. Now that's, I know the word neighborhood, most people don't know the definition of it, but it means a town, a street in which people know each other, kind of look out after each other, watch the kids playing outside. Because remember, 20 years ago, and this was just mentioned tonight on national television, years ago, kids could play outdoors until 9 o'clock at night. Hardly any parent in the United States today would allow their kid to do that today. So we have a situation where everyone's going to have to contribute. And you know, I think it's going to finally be, and not our political figures dealing with the draft, because for any political figure to mention the draft is death now. We know this because politics has to be bought. Political decisions are not made for the best interests of the public. They're what will help them. As Barkley said when he was reelected to vice president, when Truman entered office, he said, the worst thing about our government is that when we're elected, the next day we start to work on our next reelection. I think the public is going to see the wisdom of finally having the need for a draft. Israel did it, and every young person, man and woman, has to give a couple of years of their time to support their country. I think even with the greed that everything is due us and everything else, people are going to realize that we have to give back in some way, because freedom is not for free. As far as the length of the war is concerned, and I hope I'm wrong, and I'm not infallible, I never claimed to be, but I've made some predictions that I felt very strongly about. I believe the war will last probably 20 more years, 20 or plus more years. There is a chance that maybe it will only last one generation, but I don't think 10 years. I think it's going to be at least 20 more years. We're going to continue to experience attacks from enemies, but let's wake up. Let's study history. Most religious wars, if you read the history books, and most religious wars have lasted longer than any of the wars. I don't mean a particular religion that's attacking Christianity or Judaism. I mean a fundamentalist way of life that doesn't sympathize or believe the way most religions in our culture do, that people have liberty, they have the right to a way of life they want, that women can vote and do as they wish. That's just not one tribe in the rest of the world. That is massive, and that's not going to disappear in 2 decades. And by the way, as far as our children, we should be concerned about them, but they're the ones we're going to learn from. Let's just borrow from England. You talk to people who were in England in the Second World War when bombs were falling, and they were sleeping in a garage or in a wall. The door was closed. Walked to school when debris was there. I said to Jean Carr, who wrote the Upstairs, Downstairs, I interviewed her on my TV series years ago, how could you stand this? She looked at me and said, what's the matter with you, Kreskin? I was a kid. I didn't know any other way of life. I thought, this is the way life is? Hell, I'm going to go on with life and live it. Well, they're more than any other part of our culture. The youngsters are our greatest hope.
You say, Kreskin, your prediction is 20 more years of war. Will the draft...
At least, yes, at least.
Okay. With the draft that you predict will come back, will that happen within that 20 years?
Oh, yes. Oh, within that 20 years, yes. Oh, yeah.
Do you know how soon?
I mean, I believe we'll win. Now, this is the greatest country, I believe the greatest free country in the world. And in spite of... And I think, by the way, it's going to change the makeup of our political leaders. I really think it will. I think they're going to start taking after our founding fathers, who believed in what this country's needs were and what this country was founded on, not payroll and what pressure groups. The worst thing that happened to this country is pressure groups.
In that 20 years, do you know how soon the draft will happen?
No, I don't.
The other question...
No, I have no idea at all. I have no time frame. This is just... And by the way, what I've just said, don't anyone think of me as pessimistic? Hell no. I'll walk down the street with kids and let's redefine pessimism. No, I'm not pessimistic. I have a great spirit for this country. But again, remind yourself, you can't buy freedom. The government owes us very little but safety and loyalty, and it's not for free.
Kreskin, you said we will continue to experience attacks from other people. Will there be another one in the scale of Pearl Harbor and 9/11?
I don't want to say, because the answer can only be this one. You're saying, will there be one? There'll be attempts for one. Sure, there'll be many, many attempts. But that doesn't take any wisdom at all. That's pretty much part of the foundation of what terrorism is all about. And by the way, the greatest mistake, another thing we don't learn from history, and I think one of the reasons that our political figures have no sense of history is a lot of them are probably incapable of reading. Otherwise, they would have had reason to study the past. We need to learn something. You don't really reason intellectually with a dictator. You do something like that, and just look at Hitler, look at Stalin, and look at a multitude of others. All you do is give them time to prepare. And we won the Second World War with approximately 8 to 16 months of time where Hitler almost won, and he finally got the bomb done. I don't know where this half hour has gone, but I hope we can continue, and your viewers can read my book, of course, Conversations with Kreskin.
Well, Kreskin, before you run out, can I ask you, in the tradition of Mike Douglas, can I ask you one question, just your opinion? Let me get it in, Kreskin, because there are two, and I'm only going to give you one, because I know we're short on time. Will Hillary Clinton run for president?
That's interesting. It's a question I've been asked multiple times because I've spent time with her. I've appeared with her on a number of occasions, all private ones, forgetting about her political position because I am really not a conservative, nor am I a liberal. I'm certainly not a conservative, and I'm certainly not a liberal. I'm an independent thinker. I'm not programmed how I have to think on every issue. But I've been around her, and forgetting about her political position, I think she's a remarkable person. She's a very charismatic person. I got to tell you, and like her husband, whom I have never met, there's an electricity that emanates from her. It's unbelievably clear within 30 seconds after you're around her. Will she seek to run for president? Yes.
There you go.
So, to be continued, I guess.
That's a good way to end. Kreskin, you know I love you to death.
I love work. And we're going to talk again.
We are going to talk again. Kreskin, I want to let the listeners know, Conversations with Kreskin is the book. You will want to grab this. Kreskin, you take care, and we'll meet again.
And in the spirit of broadcasting, I say this all the time. I will not say goodbye to you. I've worked with you with great joy. Let's just say to be continued, okay?
To be continued. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Scott Spears Now with the amazing Kreskin. Will Hillary run? Will she win? Is Kreskin right? We're all going to find out. Remember, the book is Conversations with Kreskin. One of my favorite people, the amazing Kreskin. Until next time, this is Scott Spears, headed for the dugout.